This is Tommy's Outdoors 85. And today we're going to talk about climate change, or more specifically about a book about climate change. The title of the book is Time Nor Tide, Ireland and Climate Change. And our guest is author of the book, Ben Harkin. Now, let's take 1 second and let me introduce Ben. Ben is a 19-year-old student who had a lot of time during the lockdown, so he decided to write a book. Now just let that sink in. I have a lot of time during the lockdown, I'm going to go ahead and write a book. Not only did he write a book, he also self-published that book. And I must say, I've been blown away. If not for anything else, by the amount of research that went into that book. There's a big section at the end of endnotes with the links, with the references really, to articles, books, government documents, what have you. So during these couple of months of the lockdown, number of months of the lockdown, he researched the topic, wrote a book, and self-published the book. It is remarkable. It is remarkable. And if you still in the lookout for a present, for a Christmas present, Christmas are coming, so you may think what to buy for your close relatives. Hint, go ahead and buy that book. It's available obviously on Amazon, but I would encourage you to buy in the local shop. And we talk about in the podcast where is the best way to buy that book, so you can support Ben the most. It is really well published. It is beautifully laid out. Really quality product. It feels good in the hand. It's not one of those books that it's gonna fall apart. No, it's solid, and it really comprehensively talks about climate change. I'm not gonna say anything now that we already say in the podcast, and I'm not gonna spoil the book for you, and we're not gonna spoil the book for you in the podcast. I hope you will enjoy this episode of Tommy's Outdoors. And as always, before I let you enjoy this episode of Tommy's Outdoors, just a reminder that this podcast is available on YouTube if you're listening to this on the audio version only. So you can go to YouTube, subscribe to Tommy's Outdoors YouTube channel. Any and all podcasts, any old Tommy's Outdoors podcasts are there, plus a lot more. And now, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Time Nor Tide with Ben Harkin. Welcome to the show. It's good to see you, man.
Tommy, it's great to see you. Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's my pleasure, and I'm always happy to talk with young, ambitious people who want to do something and want to, go out with their message. And people already know, because I already said it in the introduction to this podcast. You wrote a book, and you done something like you wrote the book during the lockdown. Like, to me, it's just mind like tell me what made you to write a book, and how it's even possible to write a book in the time span of a couple of months.
So I suppose it was that a couple of things just kind of all happened at once. So in March, I was reading this book, The Uninhabitable Earth, by David Wallace Wells. It's a fantastic read. It's all about the impacts of climate change. And it had this one fact in it that by 2100, 150 million more people will die of air pollution at 2 degrees of warming than at 1.5 degrees of warming. And that really hit me, when I read that there. And I finished that up in the middle of March. And at that stage, I'd come home from college because of, restrictions were coming in. And I didn't really have an awful lot of online classes or anything. So I had an awful lot of time in my hands, and I had this motivation. And I think when you get an idea in your head that maybe I could do something, maybe I could make an impact here where others couldn't, I think it's very hard to morally turn away from that. I've been writing now for a couple of years, really since I was doing the Leaving Cert, and I'd like to think I'm a pretty good writer. So I suppose, I felt I had the skills that I could do it. I had a motivation and I had time on my hands. It all just came together very nicely in March to give me enough time to do it.
Yeah. And how long was the writing process itself versus everything that needs to happen after that? Because you also self-published that book.
Yeah, published it. So the first draft of the book was finished on the 12th of June. And I'll tell you, the first draft of the book was terrible. It was really, really bad. It took about a month of just reading as well. So just from about April to June, just doing the first draft, and that's like pulling teeth. So it is looking at a blank sheet of paper. It's a horrible feeling. So it is trying to get there. So then from June to really the middle of October, I was editing, and that's not a whole lot of fun either. There's not a lot of fun to any of it. So there is, but I was working on the book really right up until about 2 weeks before it was published, and on the 22nd of October, I just put the files in on the day I had to for the publishing date. So I hoped, to publish it with like a big name brand. That was kind of what I was hoping. And I finished up, what I thought was going to be the last draft of the book in August. And I was away for a weekend, and I was with my granda, and I was down where he's from, down Dunlow in Donegal, and he pointed out this thing. There's this beach down in Mahary, and he says that when he was young, him and his family used to walk along a road to school, and that road was on that beach. And I never knew it existed, and it was just there's something that left such an impact on me about the force of the sea. I never knew this was even there. So I think I just felt I wasn't going to wait until a publisher came to me. And I know this is important. I think I just had to get it out there. So it took a while to figure out how to design a cover and all that. But yeah, we got there. It was very busy during the summer. I was working a couple of different jobs and all that, but we got there in the end. I think I might need more hobbies. I think that's what I've learned from it.
No, man, and congratulations on that. And for all you people listening to that, the book is available on Amazon and probably more. So like where people can get your book other than Amazon. Well, yes, okay, what would be the way to get that book that would be most beneficial to you?
People could just send me cash. That'd be great. No, so it's at the minute available on Amazon, and if you're in Donegal, it's available in Bookmark and Letterkenny as well. So at the minute, I'm working on trying to get it out to a few more stores, but at the minute that's in Bookmark and Letterkenny and on Amazon. So yeah, it's unfortunate. It's not really a great feeling giving an awful lot of money to Amazon. I know that, especially from an environmentalist point of view, but I suppose with self-publishing, you're just limited in that regard. Yeah,
I mean, like the plus side is that you get access to so much bigger audience and so big market having it on Amazon, because I guess like most people, the first thing that comes to their head, if they want to get book, like even see how the cover looks like, they look it up on Amazon. And once they have it in front of them, they can click. And, I guess you're not planning to become rich based on that book. You just want to get your message out. And so I guess, I wouldn't have any holding anything back having it on Amazon. It's great.
That is the great bit about Amazon, I suppose, with the Kindle and everything. There's people in America reading it, there's people in Canada reading it, which I never expected. But it's a great feeling to see it out there.
Listen, you mentioned in the book something like that, the impact that has. So maybe before we go to that, I was wondering how to approach this podcast, because on one hand, I really don't want to be all doom and gloom and give like a little bit of a positive message, really, and then on the other side, I don't want to be like, it's sure everything will be grand,
don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. So that's not the. So I'm I was thinking how to approach this, but part of you even said it in the book that the impact it had on you, like when you were finished with the book and you're kind of loaded your head in a lot of not too positive information.
Yeah, it definitely it was an exhausting task dealing with the amount of information when you're looking at the impacts of climate change. And I suppose I was only looking at maybe the worst data or the worst. I was thinking in my head of the worst possible case, but I think it definitely, when you look at climate change, it can seem overwhelming, and it can seem like, what is the point of it all on our small scale, on even the small scale of our country? But what I wanted to do with the book is explain to as many people as I could that the solutions are there. It's not like we're waiting on some technology to come. It's not like, now where we're waiting on a vaccine, we're waiting on these developments. The technology that we have is there. It's really just that we need to get the people that are in power to push it. So, I think that there is reason to be hopeful, which I think is different than being optimistic. But I think I would describe myself as being hopeful because we do have the solutions there. Mm-hmm. If, now it is about getting people that can act to act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're obviously, there's two types of people watching this. Some people are watching this on YouTube. Some people are listening to that. So people who are watching you, they obviously see that you're younger. How old are you?
19.
19. Wow, man. So then I guess the worry is that you will be really, in your, especially when you're going to be like an elderly person, that's where it's really going to hit you, right? Potentially.
Yeah. Like, I think maybe a problem with how we've talked about climate change is that it's this 2100 problem. It's mm-hmm. the next generation, or our grandchildren and stuff like that. There, I think that's true. We're leaving a harsher world for our descendants than we were given. Mm-hmm. But it is a problem that that we're feeling now, and one that my generation is going to see in the future. Especially when you're looking at things like, say, the Met Office in Northern Ireland says that by 2070, pretty much every summer is going to be like the summer of 2018. Mm-hmm. And that's 2070. So I suppose now when we're getting more accurate modelling, we're seeing that in our generation, we're going to see an awful lot of impacts. It isn't just miles down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I guess that window is closing. It was like, it's going to be, and it's going closer and closer. And then when the young people are coming, like you coming in, it's like, hey, it's actually not next, like we are next generation, and our children are the very,
so taking the can down the road, because it's kind of been left. It feels a lot of the time like it's been that, there's an awful lot of rhetoric of, young climate activists and all this here, as though I think magically when young people come up into politics, mm-hmm. it will be fixed. Mm-hmm. But I think that, you have to start now. There's a snowball effect to acting, and there's a snowball effect to not acting. You have to get the ball rolling as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's very well said. That's very well said. It's a snowball effect to not acting as well. So going back to that.
If I write another book, I might put that on it. No, that's it.
Yeah. Listen, so going back to my original question was, did you had to, kind of put everything away, kind of reset your mind to not get depressed by all this, or did you kind of like come to peace with all that information? How was it? Was it bad, or did you have to take a time off, or?
Yeah, so like definitely by the time I got to around the end of August, I was in definite need of a break for a while. I think there was a huge amount of pressure writing the book, not only because everything has to be factually correct, there's all the fact checking and all that there, but that if someone thinks what I said was unrealistic, then that might tune them out for the rest of the book. Mm-hmm. And what I'm thinking is, like, say maybe my friends and family and people I know that would have got the book just because they know me, it might be the only book they'll read on climate change, because mm-hmm. Most people don't read a lot about climate change. Mm-hmm. So I had to get it right. Mm-hmm. Not only did have to explain the impacts, but that it couldn't be so scary that it was me scaremongering people, and it couldn't be so little that it's not worry about it. It's a really tight tight line to try and walk, and that there leaves an awful lot of pressure on me. Especially, you got to come up with solutions, but they got to be, economically sound as well. So it definitely did leave a huge impact on me, and it was a huge amount of pressure on me. When it was released, when the book was finished, there's definitely a weight off my shoulders anyway, that it's done, it's out there. I gave my best shot, and now I suppose maybe I have a different responsibility now, and now it's about trying to get that message out there.
Yeah. No, and one other question I have for you is, like you mentioned, there is a ton of information in the book, and I was blown away by the breadth of disciplines that you touched on, and the book has a lot of references. So there's a huge, at the end of the book, everybody can go back and see what sources you're referencing. And if you make a statement, it's not like, a man in Donegal makes a statement. It's actually backed up by either publication or official statements or scientific papers and so on. How difficult and how that process looked like of actually researching, because I presume you've gone through a ton of materials for writing this book.
Yeah, so like I said, I spent about a month just reading and reading papers, reading books, watching talks online, speaking to different people over the phone. I have notebooks and folders just filled with notes, and scraps of paper, and I was always reading, right up until I finished the last version of the book, because there was ideas that heard, this book's really good, I better check it out. That was, I suppose, the pressure was because it's self-published. There's the barrier to me getting it out there is lower. So I think there's a tendency that people might think, well, he's a 19-year-old who just self-published a book. Maybe it's not true at all. So I think it was very important that it had to be, everything had to be backed up by it.
Yeah.
And that took about, that was about a few days at the end, just spent checking and double checking everything. But yeah, I think it was really important that people knew that everything in it, was actually great. It wasn't just, I heard this once from a guy, or, on this.
Yeah. It's great. You're very aware that because of your young age, it will be like people might be inclined to dismiss it, and I think you did a great job on backing up everything that you were saying. Listen, when you were researching, have you also paid attention to I don't want to use word climate deniers, like a straight up wackos, but people who have, let's say, alternative opinions or criticizing certain, like how much you paid attention to these folks?
Yeah, I paid an awful lot of attention to that. I made sure in the first chapter of the book that I wanted to hit a lot of them points out of the gate, because I think, so I work when it's open, I work in a pub in Terman, and there's kind of, I would be sitting and I'd be listening, and there'd be an awful lot of talk of, Ben, the climate's always changed, don't worry about it, or it's a myth, or it's not that bad, or it's always happened before. So I suppose I had in my head this list of of things that I've heard people deny, that I've used to deny climate change. So I suppose I really felt it was important to get them arguments out of the gate. I think that for a lot of people that I would know, they mightn't maybe believe in climate change, not because they deny it, but just because they're apathetic to it, that they haven't heard really a lot about it before. Doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. So I think there is the two sides of it, that even people who say they don't believe in climate change doesn't really mean they deny it. It's just that they don't know enough about it to say that they can believe in it yet. But yeah, definitely just from speaking to people, from speaking to friends, from relatives, to people in Terman, I knew maybe what misgivings or what doubts people had, and that was why what I had to get right from the start. And I think that's one of the reasons why I felt that it was a responsibility of mine to write the book, because I kind of had this awareness of what people who gave out about the Green Party or environmentalists would have said. That, I thought maybe I could, change a few minds, and if you can do that, you kind of have to.
And I think you quite skillfully avoided wading into this conflict between like a deniers and alarmists, and I think it's really not helpful. I think having these kind of and like in many aspects of life we see this divide today, right? Like there has to be like two sides, and you're either on either side. Do you? I'm just wondering, because you're obviously very deep in that. Like, what's your take on this like hard division? Like, oh, this guy is an alarmist, right? And you got the label, and this guy is a denier, and to some extent, or to a large extent, that kills off a lot of important conversations that needs to happen. And it's not even who's right or wrong, but it's about finding solutions and hearing each other arguments. How big you think it's a problem that people on the this quote unquote opposing sides are really entrenched in their opinions? They're not willing to talk with each other.
Yeah, that's a good point. Polarization is definitely a huge problem now. It's something that I think about a lot, and I think we see it more on social media. I think when we're in our echo chambers in social media, it's the only people we see from the other side are the deniers, are the people that kind of other people might share just to say, look at this idiot, So like, I think alarmists aren't really helpful to the debate, even if they're, agree that climate change is a problem, because I think they only end up pushing people away from the problem. I think I definitely didn't want to be painted as an alarmist when writing the book. I think that if you make the argument too much about, denying or accepting climate change, you only, I think, increase the validity of people who deny it. Whereas at this point, I can't remember where I read it, that there's no real difference at the minute between people who deny climate change and people who accept it and don't act on it. I think there was a time for arguing over whether or not climate change was real. That was in the 1970s. After that, it was really a fact. I think now we just have to get on with, I think getting the messaging right, is a critical part that I think we've really failed with in Ireland. Again, it's part of that. It's a generational, generation down the line problem, or even the fact that, you're going to be taxed back to the Stone Age to save the flowers or something like that there. It's not that. It's about the climate change is a problem. It's a problem to everybody. We don't want that to happen. I think the solutions that we have, the technology that we have, can help us build a better future for all. And I think when you start focusing on them kind of debates, and I use the word debate because it's more important to get them than the arguments, you'll start winning people over. I think there's polarization on both. It's coming from both sides, definitely.
Yeah. No, that these are very good points. Listen, I want to switch gears a little bit now and dive into the book and some of the points that you made in the book. I must say I love how the book was structured and for different types of and the first one you're dealt with, and I think that especially a lot of people who listening to my podcast and my followers, subscribers, listeners, viewers, a lot of them are farmers or with a farming background, and you even I'm not going to quote it exactly, but you even said something like it's the Greens and versus the farmers, right? And oh man, that is a mess, and that must have been difficult subject to deal with, because even farmers is not like this one homogeneous group of these are all farmers and they all think the same thing. There are different farmers and there are different they thinking and they're trying, right? We know there are farmers who are really care about the biodiversity and sustainability and all these things, and then you have a like almost multinational massive big farm that has cattle farms across the globe, and this is quite different. Approach. On the other hand, I really do see something that can only come across as an anti-farming sentiment coming from certain, again, I don't want to generalize, but you got to generalize to some extent to not pick up on individuals, right? So there is this kind of like almost like an anti-farming, strange personal agenda of some people, and I'm reading either online or on social media. It's like, why? Like, are they even remember why they're doing this? It's always like, well, if there's a farmer saying something, it's for sure it has to be criticized. This is really unfortunate, right? Because farmers, especially in Ireland, are the key to so many, solving so many problems. Climate is one of them. Biodiversity loss is another one of them.
Yeah. I think that that could be a fair criticism of the book, that maybe I do paint all farmers with the one brush. But I think it's like you say, sometimes it is useful to generalize when you're trying to talk about something. I suppose I think this might go back as well to like what I was saying about social media and our echo chambers. Sometimes when you're maybe me on Twitter, it's easy to see, Green Party don't, or people and environmentalists don't hate farmers or anything. They're just misunderstood. But that's why you have to get and talk to people, who feel that way. Like that's, my friend Jamie McFadden, who's in the book, he's been farming since he could walk, and like that's how he feels. And you got to listen to that. You got to understand, why is that happening? That, this guy who's the hardest working person I know, feels that, people in the environmentalist movement really don't want them there at all. And I think that's so sad, especially, like my grandfather's a farmer and all this here. I live in Termon, I'm surrounded by fields, so like, I think I'm definitely connected to that. It's a huge problem, but it's like you say, farmers, have so much potential to do, to make changes, positive changes for biodiversity and for, carbon action, stuff like that there. But it's like, when I was talking to Jamie, he said, we're not trying to pollute anything. We want, clean air and clean rivers, and we want, a safer Ireland. But sometimes, it's not a very well-paying job. Profit margins are slim. You're relying on subsidies, so you have to do really what the subsidies are incentivizing. And I think then for environmentalists to give out that that you're following what subsidies are incentivizing, I just think it's so unfair.
And you're right. You get these extreme views being thrown at each other always, right? It's never some moderate view. It's always like, I'm gonna retweet, I'm gonna repost, or I'm gonna whatever.
Get rid of all the farmers or get rid of all the environmentalists. That's
and the other thing is that the people that follow, right? So I see this often, that you have a article or a post that says, here are the problem with farming, or with certain farming practices. Maybe that's a more accurate, right? It's not the problem with farming. There's problem with certain farming practices because of methane or carbon or whatever the case might be. And on foot of that, there are coming these almost trolls that are like, get rid of all the farmers, because I was like, no, it's not what I said, right? I said that there's a problem with certain practice or with certain.
That's not the same as a problem with farming or farmers, but people will look for what they agree with in it, and they'll just try and spin it that way. And tell you, there's this fantastic book, Whittled Away, about nature. And, it's something that I see here, that farmers are incentivized to have grazable land under EU incentives. So they're not going to protect bogs. They're going to, if they need to kind of burn hills to have grazable land, that's what's going to be done. It's like you say, it's a problem with farming practices that our government organizations are incentivizing. It's not a problem with farmers. Jim McFadden isn't waking up at the start of the day going, I'm going to release as much carbon as I can.
I'm gonna just
that's my grand didn't wake up doing that there. That's the job. And in the same way we don't not like the postman that just arrived here because he's driving a diesel engine van or something like that there. If you're working in these kind of practices, that's just part of it. We have to change the practices. We shouldn't be trying to get rid of anybody.
Yeah. And that's also like, if you wanna kind of virtue signal how environmentally aware you are, you need to just shit all over, like you said, postman who drives a diesel van is like, oh, that's like, well, really?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's so much that isn't the fault of the individual person that I think it's like you say, it's a lot of it, I think at times is virtue signaling that, we're aware of this, so we're in the right, I wrote a book on climate change. I'm not perfect, I was in the summer, I was out in the bog, bringing in the turf because that's, if Dad tells me to go to the bog, I'm going to the bog. That's and I think at times we can't expect so much from the individual person on this. I think it's just it's a rabbit hole we go down. It's just, I think at times you see it in social media, it's just nasty. I think a lot of times, it's not working. I don't think it's a way to reduce carbon emissions, but it's just bad politics as well. You're not winning anyone over.
Yeah, because you're turning people away. You're like anyone who would even consider talking or thinking, they're just like, oh no, they're just a bunch of wackos. I'm not even going to talk about them.
Exactly,
and the door shuts.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too much of the debate on climate change, I think in Ireland, is the President Jimmy Carter kind of view of climate change, that it's about wearing the jumper and taking short showers and turning the lights off and all this here kind of stuff. And it puts all this pressure on people to do these things that I just, it's obviously it's all very important. But in the end run, it's not huge whether my light from my office is on or not when the government's spending $2.5 billion on fossil fuel subsidies.
Exactly.
I just, at times, it's, I don't understand how so many people in the climate movement don't get this, that it just doesn't add up.
Yeah. I can share like a funny story because I think it was, I don't know, probably 2 years ago at this stage, I ran an experiment for probably 2 years, just short of 2 years, when I was like religiously switching off all the lights and everything. Like, you don't use it, you switch off, and at some point it was just borderline crazy. And I was doing that to find out, will I see any impact on my electricity bill?
Yeah.
And the answer is no. I haven't, perhaps, I haven't done this in a scientific way. It was just like, I look at that bill and say like, oh, I see it's lower, right? I know I see that for the past 3 months, I'm getting lower electricity bill than I used to. No.
But I've been in the dark for the past 3 months.
Yeah, no. So that's kind of, so I'm sure, no doubt I was consuming less electricity, but not even that much that I would notice that on my bill. So that kind of reinforces your point that, quit preaching to little folks. But like you said, when the government spends millions and billions of dollars or euro on stuff that is actually contradicting this. So.
Yeah, it's not like a woman in Tiernan turns off the lights in the kitchen and a power station shuts down. All right, we're going out, turned off. I think it just has so little impact. I just think at times it isn't really logical. But hey, like I say, it is useful that people are aware of these things, that electricity consumption can be tied to our emissions.
Yeah, so as long as they can draw the parallel between what they do to the bigger to the bigger scale. And in that chapter, you made quite a few excellent points, and I must admit, I learned a lot from your book. And when you read stuff like this, so for example, dairy and beef, Ireland is exporting 90% of it, and Ireland is probably one of the biggest exporters in the world. which is a separate conversation. But then we're importing some, and like if you have it like straight up like in front of it, like hang on a second, so we exporting 90% of it, and then we bringing back some, like how does that make sense at all, right? Plus all the cost of this miles that the food is traveling, obviously, right? Like, what the heck?
Definitely, definitely, it is illogical at times, and I think I suppose a lot of the stuff, or some of the stuff that were important, is coming from Britain and stuff like that there, and that's going to become more difficult shortly. So I think it's important that we're making sure that the food we're producing, is staying here. Now, I'm not trying to establish a self-reliant country or anything like that there, but I think just at times it's something to be aware of, that we need to produce all this beef for it to be sent away, and yet we're bringing so much back in that isn't sustainably produced like it is here. Like when we're getting cows out in fields for most of the year and stuff like that there, like that's what we want. That's the idea, that's the goal. And when we're doing that here, I think we should be encouraging that that's the beef we're eating.
No, that was and another point that you made very clear, and I heard that not long ago in slightly different form, that a lot of times being a farmer is not really a job. Like, we know it's a job kind of, but it's not like a job. Like someone said, like, it's not my job, it's who I am. They go on the field, and you were quite clear on that. So I think that any farmers can go ahead and read the chapter and not dread it, because I think that you presented that in a fair way.
Yeah.
One thing though I have for you mentioned you dedicated a part of that chapter to methane emissions on from cows, and this a little bit ties to my question on your research, how you're doing research, because a lot of this stuff is not really set in stone, right? Because even if you say, okay, how we calculate carbon emissions and how we calculate methane emissions, and it's often easy, to pick a paper, and that paper presents like, oh, this is how we do this, right? But then there's another paper that presents it in a different way, and just coincidentally, I think like a couple of days earlier, I was reading a paper by Dr. Miles Allen, when he was talking about methane emissions, like, that methane emissions are working differently than we thought, and that's kind of like in a sets everything in a different light. I don't want to just go into the details because I'm sure we will butcher it. Do you envision writing in a year's time, like a second edition of this book, as the more, because obviously a lot of these details, a lot of science of these details, even how we gonna calculate these emissions, are we gonna offset this, are we not gonna offset that, right? Because it's not like you stick in a sensor on the cow and you measure and like, oh, this is how much it, and it's it's very complex.
Chart and the dial telling us what the emissions are at.
Exactly. So it's a quite complex science and statistics, and what you take into account, what you not take into account, and so on and so on. Do you see yourself perhaps in some time you're like writing another edition of the book, and as more data becomes available, or as more, because I would imagine that you consider that whatever you put in that book now in 2020, in 2025 or in 2023 might not be the case, and it might shift either way. It may shift in that way or another way, if you know what I mean.
That's, well, to start off with the problem of methane. Methane was a tough one because there are so many people talking about it, and took a while to get into. I got views from there was books just about carbon emissions, stuff like that there. There was books that are about defending beef farming, looking at the Irish Farmers Association, Chagas, getting all these views into it. And I even thought it was important that when I was talking about methane emissions, I talk about different time frames, and in the two different time frames, I'm referencing two different sources, because I think methane, I think a lot of the time when we think something in our head, we look for facts to back that up, and then we remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Confirmation bias.
Yeah, exactly. That was the word I was looking for. And I think, when people might feel Irish farming is, there's a lot of green area, it's fine, it's gotta be good for the environment. And I think when we hear things like, methane emissions might be good, then we lock onto that. Yeah, that guy's right. So I think it's important to just, to get in as many views as possible. But the methane is a greenhouse gas, and it acts differently to carbon dioxide. And I think it was important that if this might be the only book that some people might read on climate change, that, I got that across, that this is different and it's confusing and we're not sure on everything. And there's definitely a feeling of, hey, parts of what I read in the book might be wrong. And I'll definitely be willing to accept that. Hope I don't have to write a second edition for a while. I'm going to definitely take a break. But yeah, I think we'll see how emissions start going. Maybe, in a few years, I could come at it with a second edition and see, how things are changing. I think it's an interesting point when you say about what we account for and what we don't account for. Because, Ireland's emissions are about 60 million tonnes. But that doesn't account for aviation emissions, which is another 3.5 million tonnes, or land use emissions, which is another 6. We're really at 70 million tonnes. But, so it's a difficult thing to try and absorb. And I think sometimes maybe if we focus too much on the percentages, we're not really going to get we're not going to get everything like that there. There's not going to be a day in the future where, we hit it. And, it's like that Father Ted thing of, the day of the Ice Age ended. That's not going to happen here. When I got climate change, we're here, we're carbon neutral. It's going to be hard to account for everything, So, I think I might maybe in the future, if we start to see a downward trend, or if we don't start to see a downward trend, and I think we need another, another rap on the knuckles maybe to get something, I might go at it again. But yeah, listen, there are still definitely complexities in it that we need to, and we can't pretend to people, that there aren't. I think it's wrong for us to say, don't worry about it. It's important to get across the idea of complexity and nuance. Things.
And this is one of the things again that the thought I had when I was reading your book, that it gives like an excellent starting point. And because of the width and depth of the issues that you're taking on and all the references, that I really think it gives an excellent starting point for anyone who wants to go deeper and perhaps pick one element that interests a particular person the most, whether it's a farming or renewables, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And go through this and like, that's interesting. And then can go to go through your references, and then once they go through references, then another one and another one, and kind of starting going deep, which that your book starts. So in that sense, I think that even anyone who wants to, go with like, I think it's time I get my own view on this. I think it's, it's a good point, not because you tell them what to think, but you kind of touch on all these areas. Well, then the people can go and research themselves, and they can come to your own conclusions, and they, can come to the conclusion that you were right or that you were wrong, whatever it is. But at least they're start educating themselves around these issues.
Yeah, well, like the original title of the book was, I was always thinking the idea of something like, the Handbook on Ireland and climate change, because how it's structured, there are 10 chapters, and they can be read independently of each other. And actually, a lot of people that I know have read them like that. They've all kind of, for some reason, gone start, acknowledgements, farming, and then they've kind of, which is what I wanted, because, people are busy and people might only have certain things that interest them, and they can go to that there. But yeah, if, that's what I want. I want to give people that baseline knowledge, that idea of what is parts per million. What's important and what's not when it comes to our emissions. What do we need to be focusing on, and what do we not need to worry about so much? Yeah. So that then, when people maybe even just hear about things in the news and stuff, it can be put into more context. But yeah, there's, go to the references, follow up the books. There's a further reading section at the back. Where there's different books, follow them. There's so many, and there's things in them books that will contradict ideas of mine, and there are parts of books that will contradict each other, and that's what it's all about. There's no, this isn't black and white. There are lots of ideas and opinions, and we got to consider them all.
That shows the complexity of an issue, and you're right. It's like a handbook. I think it's you put it. It's a handbook. It's a starting point.
Yeah.
Just for our listeners, would you mind explaining the difference in like how CO2 works and how methane works as a greenhouse gas?
Yeah. So CO2 it's carbon dioxide. It's what's emitted when we burn fossil fuels, really. So, like petrol, diesel, and coal. And it's in our bogs and the carbon. So that's released, it goes into the atmosphere, and it stays there for a very long time. And these greenhouse gases keep in all the heat, and that's a problem. So methane works a bit differently. It's a different chemical formula. So after about a dozen years, it breaks down in the atmosphere into carbon dioxide and water. So there's still, residues. It's still resulting in carbon emissions, but the methane doesn't stay there as long. But the problem is that for the time that methane is there, it's much more powerful. So if you have, the equivalent amount of methane as you do carbon dioxide for these dozen years it exists, it's about 80 times more powerful. It is 80 times more warming. So then it breaks down, and then we're still left with, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from this methane. So the problem is that, the idea is if methane emissions stay the same right now, if there's no new cows added, if there's, nothing else, if there's no new methane added, then really we're fine because the methane will break down. They call it the methane cycle. Now, that's not quite right because, again, some carbon dioxide is being kept, in the atmosphere every time we add more methane. But the key to it is people then say, well, don't worry about it. Don't worry about agriculture. Don't worry about cows. Don't worry about methane. It's not to be considered. Methane emissions are rising. They're rising here and they're rising all around the world. And because methane's so, potent, because it's so strong, we have to act on it. I think what I wanted to get across in the book is these idea of tipping points that, if we hit certain levels, whether it's in carbon emissions, whether it's drying in the Amazon, then we're locking in a lot of warming. So that's why we got to get we got to get a grip on this urgently before we get, kind of locked in to an awful lot more warming. And that's why we got to get a control of methane. Yeah, it's different. They are two different gases. Greenhouse gases puts them all under the same kind of bracket, but they are two different things.
Okay. Right. So let's switch gears now and let's talk about renewable energy. Right. And again, structure of your book. We won't have time to go through all the chapters that are there, but I'm just want to touch on a couple of points and really get your views, because I presume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you have your own views on certain issues talked in the book. But you're not necessarily pushing your own views because you're trying to present everything in such a methodical manner, right? So, and renewable energy is a big one because on one end, it is often portrayed as the ultimate solution. Oh, we need to all switch to renewables, right? That's just like, but then, for example, Germany tried it. And the results were not great. Actually, their net emissions went up and they start refurbishing coal plants that they're shut down. It just didn't work, right? And a part of that was like, damn it, if Germans can't do it, nobody can do it, right? So some of that. But so I'm wondering, like, what is your own personal view on that? Because again, I just want to stress it again, like a book feels like really like a handbook, that starting point, and you're not trying to push your individual points of view. But I'm wondering, like, what is your, feelings about the, massive development of all the renewable energy? Is it ready for that or not?
Germany is an interesting point. I remember, years ago, I had this National Geographic subscription, and one of them was all about climate change, and one of them was about this coming energy Vita in Germany. I butchered the pronunciation of that, even though I'd done German to leaving cert, but it was, Germany tried this huge amount, this increase in renewables. Now, it also happened that because of Fukushima, they cut back on their nuclear energy. So then they kind of, I think they refurbished, like say, the coal plants to try and create stability on the grid. Renewables are, definitely can cut a lot of emissions. And the interesting thing about them is the technology's there. We're not waiting on new renewables. I think solar is one of the cheapest forms of energy in the world right now. But it's not going to solve everything because electricity isn't all of our emissions. I think it's around 12%. I can't remember offhand. But the important thing is that you need to have stability on the grid, because what happens when the wind stops blowing, then if you're running all on wind turbines, you run into a bit of a problem. So that's why at the minute it's renewables can only make up around 65% of the grid. So we need to start finding ways to store that electricity so that we can use it. And that's the key. So if we don't do that, we're going to be stuck using natural gas to create that stability, because we need it. We need stability, and that's so in my view, the only way we can do that at the minute is with hydrogen, is with using excess renewable electricity to create hydrogen and then using that as a fuel like we would natural gas. And then that's how so we have really too much renewables, we generate hydrogen, and then if the wind stops, hydrogen kicks into gear and gets us going. And hydrogen's a great fuel. It can be used for heating and other things that got there. And I think when we look at renewables, we do have huge potential in Ireland with our offshore wind. That's, I think, where we need to be focusing on. The past few weeks brought that into stark reality when we seen what happened in Mean Bog with the bog slide, which seems to be, wind turbine and maybe part of the coniferous plantation as well. So
it was crazy. Like for people who didn't see that, they should look it up, because
check it out. It's just unreal.
It's like an entire, almost like a forest, and like this sliding.
Just
trees standing. Yeah.
It is insane. Unreal is the only word, because that is all it looks like. Mm-hmm. And listen, that's an example of, industrialization, and it's an example of what happens when we, not everything about I think when we think on climate change, we think on environmentalism and conservation, when they're not actually the same thing at all. And I think because a lot of the time, and I don't like using the word the media, but when this has been talked about in the media in the past, because it's been pushed to a corner, like everything has been pushed in the same corner. So there is that balance of, conservation and climate change isn't the same thing. And there's a debate that, we're going to have, and we need to have better rules and better policies in place. But renewable electricity has huge potential to cut emissions. We should want it because we shouldn't be burning fossil fuels for any reason. Yeah. We shouldn't want air pollution. We shouldn't, I think we see a problem when we're, giving countries like Saudi Arabia huge amounts of money. Mm-hmm. I don't think any of us want that. Yeah. So
it's funny. Saudi Arabia is funny because they have a biggest unexplored oil fields in the world, and they're start driving prices of oil down, because I read it somewhere that they officially obviously they have a whole media machine and publications and everything, which is like fossil fuels are here to stay. We're going to be using them for the next 100 years, yada, 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 yada. On one end, but on the other hand, they know good and well what's coming, and they're driving, they famously, they decided to not adhere to the limits of the amount of oil they're taking out, because like someone said, like they know that oil sold cheap is better than oil not sold at all. So they're kind of pushing so Saudi Arabia is one of them.
Like clean energy is the future, because it's just making, economical sense at this point. It's just cheaper. So, more companies are going for it. So when we're starting to now divest from fossil fuels, and now that subsidies are moving away from it, it's harder for these countries to keep making money off it, and we're going to see more and more people pushing towards renewables. But yeah, it's like everything in it. It's complicated. There is no silver bullet to this.
Yeah, and I guess that's what you're I'm going to keep harping on how great your book is structured and discusses all these points, because it really blew me away. What's your take on nuclear energy? I get that you think that the hydrogen is the thing rather than nuclear.
So nuclear was originally in the electricity chapter, but it was taken out because it was, like I said earlier, I didn't want to be painted as an alarmist, as an extremist, as somebody who didn't know what's going on. I think nuclear energy is pretty good. I think it provides a stable electricity source, but it's politically, well, some people call it politically unpopular. It's political suicide, I think, especially in Ireland, where the country is so small. So I just think that for Ireland, there's just no point in even talking about it. You're not going to win anyone over, and you're only going to push people away. So I think the nuclear energy can definitely be something that we should consider. I think Bill Gates is funding an awful lot of interesting research into this. Although maybe, in these days you might want to associate yourself too much with Bill Gates with the conspiracy theories.
Yeah, almost like whatever you touch is like either unpopular or conspiracy, or someone gonna get upset. Like, what the heck? You can't talk about anything now.
Yeah. So everyone knows we're doing this over Zoom, not Microsoft Teams, in case they think it's
exactly. We're doing it over Zoom. Yes. We're not sponsored, or we're not pushing. No, yeah. But about the nuclear power. Again, I'm just want to mention something for the interest of our listeners and viewers, and you might comment on it if you want. That to me, it's a little bit like with because we know about these big disasters, right? Chernobyl, Fukushima, and what was the other one in Britain. But this is a little bit like with safety of air travel. Right? Everybody hears when the plane crashes because there's like 300 people dies. But then if you compare how safe it is to fly versus how safe it is to drive a car, there's not even a comparison. It's way safer to fly. Yeah. And I think the similar situation is with the nuclear power, because we hear about but if you look at the actual amount of deaths, including deaths caused by the air pollution, caused by any other source of energy versus nuclear power, that's not even a comparison. Yeah. And another interesting point I read about the waste from we have this waste that is radioactive, but actually there is very, very little of that waste compared to the amount of energy produced. It's almost nothing, especially if you compare that to carbon dioxide emission. It's almost nothing. And on top of that, we know how to safely store it long term. So these
chucked in the sea, we're not just dumping it in the beach or something like that there. It's like, and it's like you say, we look at the disasters, and like when we look at 1,300 people die every year in Ireland of air pollution, and that's 1,300 people of air pollution, and that's caused by the fuels we're using to power ourselves at the minute. So, and this is a problem that we come up with, say, when we talk about wind energy. This was one of the things that people would have said to me, working in the pubs, that should the emissions been made off them's huge. So is the emissions when you make a power station. So is the emissions when you import fossil fuels, when you burn the fossil fuels. Just because something's the status quo at the minute doesn't mean that that's the baseline. It doesn't mean that everything above that is what we should consider. Like, an awful lot of carbon goes into the way we live our lives as normal, and we shouldn't just take that as the norm, or as how things need to be done. But yeah, nuclear energy is something that's really interesting. I think we just lost the argument on it, and it's another debate over, environmentalism versus climate change.
Mm-hmm.
An awful lot of people that we would have seen that maybe were leading the maybe environmentalist movement in the 70s and 80s would have been anti-nuclear. Even back to the 60s would have been anti-nuclear. And that's not the same as working on climate change. But maybe it's all become a bit muddled at the minute. And again, I think it's unfortunate that maybe we just lost the argument on that one. But I just don't think you're not going to win anyone over, especially not in Ireland. The one is we do use a bit of nuclear energy in Ireland when we import, because we're importing electricity from France and from England, who have nuclear reactors. So we do use a little bit of it. But I think we're better off just staying like that, because I think if I mention it, if I've mentioned it in the book, it's very easy for people to go, this guy's a lunatic.
Yeah, I didn't. To be honest, I didn't realize that nuclear energy in Ireland is so controversial. You just kind of enlightened me on that. But you're making an excellent point that I never heard before. So clearly spelled out, that the climate change and environmentalism or working on the environment are two different things.
Yeah.
And so I have a question for you, or maybe not a question, but really a kind of discussion point. Let's say solar panels, right? And we talk about, and often like biodiversity loss and climate change are lumped together. Like, we need to address biodiversity loss and climate change and biodiversity loss, like almost like they're the same thing, right? And then it comes to solar power, right? And also people who are aware of the environmental movement, we know about issues we have with Sitka spruce plantation, this timber plantation. Really, it's not the woodland and the pollution and everything, and so on and so on. And so we know that all those trees, which are trees, are a problem. And again, practice how we planting them and what we do with them. Then on the other hand, we say, solar power. And then when you're saying in your book about solar power panels on the roofs of the houses, that's fine. But then, there's a lot of talk about the solar panels on, vast areas of land.
Yeah.
Right. And if you think about it, that toxic and bad Sitka spruce plantation is almost like a paradise compared to the vast amount of land covered by solar panels.
Yeah.
Definitely nothing going to live there. Plus, they're extremely toxic as a waste, because that solar panel works for, 5 years, 10 years. Then it's not
find a way to dispose of it.
Yes, it's super toxic.
Yeah. It's definitely a problem. And I think, again, this is something that when we go back to how we burn fossil fuels, it's not great for any animals, our current way of doing it. And energy is a tough thing to produce. It's a tough thing to try and create enough energy to power homes, to power cars.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be some kind of an offset on that there. I think, there's no free energy that we can get. And it is important that, we don't try and pretend that, again, it's this thing of, we can't talk down to people. We're not talking to the lowest common denominator. The job is to raise it. We shouldn't try and hoodwink people and say, don't worry about it. Solar panels are fine. This is good. It's good for the environment. It's good for nature. It's not. There are disagreements in this, and that's what we've got to consider. There's, it's like I said earlier, there's all these nuances. So that's why, so wind energy, we shouldn't be having it in bogs. That's an obvious statement. I don't know why it was ever allowed. And that's why I think it's another reason for offshore wind. It's away from us, so we don't see it, but also it's not on our soil. It's not affecting our animals. And that's why I would especially be just a huge fan of offshore wind energy for that reason. Yeah, solar panels are great on houses, and that's probably how they're going to be for Ireland. We're not going to have these kind of vast tracts. But yeah, I know the video you're talking about, or the pictures, where just kind of the solar panels cover the hill. I've seen it on Twitter, and we shouldn't pretend that they're good for biodiversity, because they're not. And the debate is, is that something that we take? Do we reduce biodiversity to reduce emissions? It's not an easy decision.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm actually blown away that you said it, but that's a point. That's actually something I want to ask you. Like, do you and you know, there's no good or bad answer, but this is something to consider. Like, are we willing to take a hit on biodiversity
yeah,
or habitat in
yeah.
some areas to reduce emissions and build? This is like super difficult. There's no good
Yes.
answer to that.
Would you allow electricity in Ireland to be entirely carbon neutral if it meant the extinction of X amount of bird species?
Yeah.
Because at times we got to consider that. We got to consider that maybe this mightn't be great for biodiversity where we're putting these wind farms, and that it's not going to be an easy choice. It's not all easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, but that's why we got to talk about it. We can't, it's like the wind farm that we seen in Mean Bog, it seemed to have been pushed through, and it wasn't talked about enough. The board plan didn't listen to the debates, and that's why we have to have these debates. And it's a responsibility of people talk about climate change to talk about biodiversity, and it's a value problem as well. That for some people, biodiversity isn't a huge problem. For some, it is.
Yes.
Environmentalism and climate change are not the same thing, and that it's good to get into that.
Excellent point. Like on the renewables, I think that the tidal and like you said in your book that this is not easy, but I feel like I'm a fan of nuclear power. To be honest, I'm a fan of nuclear power. I think because it's so well established and well understood that we like you said, the technology is there. It's all political, but we probably could replace everything that is coal powered with nuclear, no problem, because the technology is established. We know how it works. We can build it's technically possible, and I would love to see it, but it's obviously not going to happen for all those reasons. But if you ask me, what I think is like a holy grail that we really not tapping into almost at all, and you can explain in a second why, because it's difficult, is a tidal power, is the power of the tide. And I realized the power of the tide one day when I seen a number of ships anchored on the, waiting to get into the port.
Okay.
And obviously each ship is like thousands and thousands tons, and they were all pointing one direction. And then I came out 12 hours later this day, and they were all pointing the other way.
Yeah.
And I realized how much energy is required to just swing those ships.
Yeah. If you try to do it with a machine, it would be a huge
millions of tons. And it just shifted like that in a time span of hours, right? It's like, whoa, that's some serious power there. If we could harness that would be awesome. So maybe now you can explain why it's so difficult.
So again, when we go back to this environmentalist point, that generally disrupting tides can lead to an awful lot of consequences that we don't know about. Things like beaches and stuff like that there, a lot can happen if we slow down the water and stuff like that there. For me, it's the problem of economics of scale. It's, in the same way, you talk about nuclear, we know how to do wind and we know how to do it well, and we can do it in big scale, whereas tidal hasn't really been done on that level before. So it's going to be very hard in the next, say, 20 years, which is the time frame we need to be thinking on to expand that to national levels. But I definitely agree, tidal, just the net amount of energy coming in off the Atlantic is huge.
Yeah.
Actually, I used to work as an oyster farmer.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know all about the comings and goings of the tides, and it is unreal how quickly, it can move, and and the damage it can do and the power that it has is awesome, I think is the word that springs to mind. But it is a real source of power that we should be thinking. And I think it's something that we should be spending more money on research and development of. I think maybe it's something maybe as a country that we could start looking into. But for me anyway, wind energy, given the time frame we're thinking on, is what we got to be looking at. But there's plenty of options there,
Yeah. One other thing I want to touch on is transport, and obviously, surprise, surprise, we have a chapter about transport. But you know what? While reading about transport and all the points that you're making about the cars and journeys, and like another excellent points you made, like if we get into the electric cars, they're really like a set of batteries that are sitting there and can be used for something useful. That like overarching thought I had when I was reading that chapter was that really a lot of this is down to the way we used to live our lives. We and how wasteful that is, right? Yeah. You have this like a big Range Rover or whatever, like a big massive car, and there's like one guy takes a 7-mile journey, and then takes a 7-mile journey back. That's it, right? It was like, what? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, how many people can you sit in that car? 7, right?
Yeah.
How much time that car actually moves? 20 minutes a day? Like, really? Like, how does that even, if you think about this in this terms, like, how does that even make sense?
The Jeeps and Land Rovers, and they're all becoming so much more popular at the minute, which is strange. I think everybody just likes being higher up. I don't know why you need a tank to get to to do the school run, but
no. motoring trends are outside of the outdoors theme, but I agree. They're just ridiculous.
Maybe it's just a kind of a whole load of simultaneous midlife crisis going on at the one time.
Yeah, it feels like that.
Yeah, but like, hey, it's but the bigger the car, the more energy we need, and they're going to make it tougher to be electric. It's going to put more strain on the batteries. So, it's a tough one. I think it's the same way with electricity, is that if you convert the fuel, it doesn't really matter what you do with it. Like if we have carbon neutral electricity, it doesn't really matter how long we leave the lights on or whatever, because it's carbon neutral. It's the same with cars. If we do get them running on electricity, then it doesn't really matter how much we use them, because it's carbon neutral. But yeah, it's like, then that's a problem with manufacturing. That we have to build these cars, and the bigger the car, the more carbon emissions that are going to come with it. And there's no easy way to make steel or, make metal and tires and all that kind of stuff carbon neutral. Manufacturing is just a problem that it's really going to have to be offset more than it's going to be reduced. So cars are kind of one of those areas that it's more about not having more of them. But then that's a problem that we talk about when we think in rural Ireland a lot, that, like Eamon Ryan talked about, people carpooling and stuff like that there. And, people think that the, Greens or environmentalists or climate change people are going to take away their cars and stuff like that there, which isn't what I want. Like I'm waiting to do my driving test now, and I don't drive an electric car. I'm not going to pretend, that I'm better than anyone else. We all admit, because that's the options that are available to us.
Yeah.
Hey, car is a tough one. It's not easy.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that. I just can't remember.
No, but I mean, like, I guess, this is again changing. I read somewhere that the young generation, like people like you and even, who are already older than you, they're less likely to have a car, especially in an urban environment. When
I'm in college in Belfast, like I was last year, I walked everywhere. I didn't even take a bus because I couldn't figure out how to read the bus timetable. I just had to walk. But yeah, like when you're in the city, you have that kind of the comfort of not needing to use a car. In rural Ireland, that's just not, I don't think it's a possibility. And I don't think we should pretend that public transport can, fill the gaps of having a car. That's just not my experience of it anyway. And from anyone I've spoken to, it's not their experience of it either, that having a private car is just necessary for life. So, we need to give incentives for people to, get electric models now, because even if you give someone, say, a diesel hybrid, that could be another 10 years, before they might consider getting a new car. So it's like they said, this kind of 20-year time frame that we got to be thinking. We got to start doing it quickly. And like, I'm not going to begrudge anyone for not getting an electric car. I'm going to buy a car, and it's not going to be electric. You know, I'm not going to be able to afford one. So I'm not going to, preach from top of the altar that you should, when I'm not going to. But that's
Man, I'm really happy for that conversation, because it is really refreshing. I must say, it is really refreshing, and there's a lot of things that I want to touch on, but it's probably no point now, because like, to this point, I think the for me the most refreshing point that you make is admitting that conservation, environment, and climate change are two different things, and certain practices that will lead us towards lowering emission might be bad on the environment, right? Batteries, lithium. Where are you going to get all the lithium? You mentioned in your book nickel, and cobalt.
Yeah.
You need to get it from somewhere. You need to put it somewhere once you're done with it. And these are hard things. And there are no like an answer. And I don't want anyone to go away after listening to this podcast thinking that you're giving all the answers.
Yeah.
Because you're not. It is just so that book is just a starter of very important and very interesting and difficult conversation, but the conversation that we all need to have. Listen, what's in general, what is you said at the top of the show that you're generally optimistic, but surely you're not 100% optimistic, right? What's your, do you have thoughts that perhaps we can't. In theory, we say these things, but really we can't do this. And I have an interesting thing that I want to share with you, but I'm going to let you speak first. Like,
yeah, so it's like I said, I think I would describe myself as being hopeful more than being optimistic, because I think that it's, I'm hopeful because it's like I said, the solutions are there. And hey, we've gone in depth in this, in the fact that everything from the politics of it to the solutions, there's no black and white. It's all nuance, and I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. But the solutions are there, in the sense of, we can go with clean energy and stuff like that there. So it is just about getting it across to politicians, to people that are making the decisions, that this is what needs to be done. And this isn't just about getting the Green Party into government, because I think even a problem with that is that if they're fighting for climate change, I think it naturally puts everybody on the other side. But it's about getting everybody. It's about because if you're not controlling the purse strings, it's very hard to make any decisions. It doesn't matter if you run the Department of Climate Action. If you're not making the budget, you're not having a huge amount of change. Everyone, every party, from every politician, from the Taoiseach to the county councillor, just has to know that climate change is a problem and people care about it, and that the solutions are things that people want, because it genuinely will bring about, I think, better lives for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, man, is there anything else that you wish I asked you, or you wish we talked about but we didn't? So now you can go if we missed anything.
I'll just spend the next half hour now. I've got it. I've just got to kind of speech now. If I could, one thing, it's so inconsequential, but that no one really has noticed, is that the sections of the book are Bob Dylan albums, and my Uncle Sean. So that was, I just wanted to bring that up, because I was quite proud of that, and not a lot of people got it. So that's the most important thing I think everyone should take from this. Listen to more Bob Dylan. Don't worry about climate change.
Awesome.
Me and Tommy have got climate change covered go and listen to Bob Dylan. I think that's
very good. Very good. That's a very good point. So for all the folks, Tide Nor Tide, Ireland and Climate Change. It's a story. There's a story about the title.
the title. Time Nor Tide is from the oyster farm. So we'd be working. So you work in the oyster farm. You go out when the tide is going down, and then you work until the tide comes back in, so that the tractor doesn't get stuck. So the phrase is "time nor tide waits for no man," and the joke on the oyster farm used to be that the tide will wait for a few good men, because we were the few good men. It'll wait on us till we're done. So the joke in the oyster farm was always that I was going to get a tattoo of all of these different phrases from the oyster farm, and "time nor tide" was one of them. So if you see me on the next time we do the podcast, I'll have a big chest tattoo.
On your chest. Right. Listen, folks. So Amazon for now, and the bookshops in Donegal, but you're working on it. As more, how people get in touch with you on social media and other platforms?
So I'm on Twitter at Harkin_Ben, and I'm on Instagram at Ben_Harkin. So you'll find me on them there.
Gotcha. So folks, go and buy the book. I'm putting that episode in the beginning of December, so it's a great time to buy Christmas presents, and I think that's very, very good present to get people thinking, and like we covered a lot. It's a great book. It's almost
perfectly inside a stocking as well. That's just
right. So like you covered everything. You covered everything with that book. So
I'm on the ball on this. I'm thinking.
Great. So folks, get the book, Time Nor Tide, Ireland and Climate Change, Ben Harkin. Ben, thank you very much for your time. It was great conversation. I learned a lot from you. I learned a lot from the book, and I'm sure that people will learn a lot. And I mean, like, folks, don't be scared of that book, right? I just want to finish up with that. Like, don't be scared that this is not like a alarmist book. This is not a book that's gonna tell you that you need to stop heating your house. It's a book that tries to lay out all the difficult problems with the references and where the data and when everything came from. And if you're interested, or even if you disagree with some of those points, you can go in and do your own research and make up your mind. So Ben, great job, and thanks a lot for doing this.
Oh, thanks very much for having me on. It was brilliant to get to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you.